Okay, here we go. So welcome, everybody. Good evening. I am Mia Honecker. My preferred pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am the Interim Associate Director for the Office of Latinx, Asian and Native American Affairs. So before I begin, to help with limiting background noises so we can hear our panelists, please mute your microphones when you're not speaking. Thank you. We are also going to start our evening tonight with a land acknowledgement to pay tribute to the original inhabitants of the land that we are on. So Wright State University and the Office of Latinx, Asian, and Native American Affairs formally acknowledge that we are located on the homelands of the Session, Hopewell, Adena, Miami, and Shawnee peoples. Our institution occupies the sacred ground sacred ground of our indigenous people who have experienced atrocities no human should endure. We acknowledge that these lands will forever hold the heartbeat of our First Nation. We will strive to honor, respect, and pay homage to the hopes, dreams, and struggles these lands represent. Through this land acknowledgement, and as a member of the Wright State University community, we commit to educating ourselves and our greater community about the continued relationships between these lands and its indigenous peoples. So I would like to welcome to you everyone to the Am I Enough Being Multiracial in the AAPI Community Student Panel Discussion. This event, and I am going to turn that off. Hold on, Rose. Sorry about that. This event is part of our Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month celebration at Wright State University. The official AAPI Heritage Month is actually May. However, we celebrate it in April at Wright State while our students are still on campus. So in January 2021, the U.S. inaugurated its first female vice president, who is of Black and South Asian descent. With the selection of Madam Vice President Harris, the number of multiracial Asian Americans rising, and with the recent spike in anti-Asian attacks, conversations around the way those who identify as multiracial, how they define themselves and talk about identity are happening more. Tonight, we are having more of that discussion with our panel of WSU students who will share their experiences, stories about being multiracial in the AAPI community. Before I introduce our facilitator, we have some guidelines for tonight's discussion. So with the limited time, and our panelists will keep each answer to the questions to no more than 3 or 4 minutes each. So everyone will have a chance to answer. And we ask to please stay on topic and listen respectfully without interrupting others. We will have time at the end of the discussion for our audience to ask questions. So if you wish to ask a question, please use your raise your hand feature and unmute yourself or write it in the chat box. So tonight's discussion is led by Dr. Max Tokarsky. Dr. Tokarsky is a professional psychologist and a teacher from Dayton, Ohio, who specializes in child and family mental health, and he is also a WSU alum. Now I will turn the room over to Dr. Tokarsky to introduce our student panelists and begin tonight's dialogue. So welcome, Max.
Hi, Mia. Thank you for that. My name is Max. My pronouns are he and him. They is also acceptable. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to say that Black Lives Matter. And I'd also like to take a few moments to recognize everything that's going on in the world while we are having this discussion. It's always really neat for me to be in a room of fellow multiracial Asians. It's very rare. I remember the first time that I was in a space like that, I was really buzzing. But before I get sidetracked and get excited about talking about that, let's take a moment of silence for George Floyd, for Dante Wright, for John Crawford, for Sandra Bland, for those lost in Atlanta, Soon Chung Park, Yoon Jung Grant, Sooncha Kim, Young Yu, Delana Ashley Yon, Paul Andre Michaels, Jiao Jay Tan, Dao Yu Fang. Okay, thank you. Again, my name is Max. I'm a psychologist in Dayton. I'm from Dayton, Ohio. Let's all introduce ourselves in the following way. If you want, say your name and pronouns, your field of study, define your ethnic intersection in a few short words. So I know we might get verbose during this, but I would say I'm Polish and Thai. Um, I also grew up checking the other box. I am Asian. I am multiracial. I'm a person of color. I will only check white if I also get to check all those other options. Um, Please also share other identity variables you feel are important to you. I'm cisgender, man, able-bodied. I am from Dayton, Ohio, and I think I've said enough about me. Um, is there anyone who wants to go first? Okay, Ben, you're right underneath me, so I choose you.
Good choice. Hi, I'm Ben Osborn. I'm a social sciences education major. I use he, him, they, them pronouns. I switch between the two a lot. Uh, Social sciences education. I'm from Wilmington, Ohio, a small town in the middle of nowhere. If you've been there, I'm sorry. uh, I'm non-binary, gay, if you haven't noticed. Uh, I'm Native Alaskan and Hawaiian.
Isabelle, how about you?
Hi, I'm Isabelle. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I study international business with a minor in economics and a certification in business analytics. It's a mouthful, I know. Um, I kind of grew up almost everywhere. My dad was in the military, so I lived overseas and in America as well. Um, I identify as a Filipino American. I usually used to check the Asian box only growing up, and sometimes the other if there wasn't any specification. But yeah.
Rebekah.
She, her pronouns. I'm a social work major and health comm minor. And then I identify as a Taiwanese American woman who has a physical disability. And yeah. So I guess I should say that I was adopted from Taiwan and then lived in the States for a couple years. Then my parents became missionaries in China, so I lived there for 9 years and then moved back here. So yeah, kind of been kind of all over the place as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebekah. Tionna.
Hi, I'm Tionna Clyburn. Everyone at the university just knows me as Tia. I use she, her pronouns primarily, but they, them is not a problem either. My major is media studies, and I'm also getting a certification in digital media and writing. I will be graduating in a couple weeks. I identify as a African American and Asian woman. My dad was in the military, so I grew up all over the place as well. It was a fun ride, but I've lived in Dayton the longest, so I technically can say I'm from Dayton, I guess. But my experience with the boxes was always a struggle. I used to always have to check the other box because I'm also partially Native American, so you can't check three boxes normally. So I would always click the other box, but that meant I got left out of a lot of student things when I was like at Sinclair and stuff like that. So it's kind of nice at Hardesty you can check three boxes. So that's my story.
Thank you, Tionna. Mia, how about you? I think it'd be nice to add a generational piece to this. And,
So,
please.
yeah, I am a lot older than you all are. I'm going to be 50 this year, so I'm celebrating my half century mark. So I am Korean American. my dad also military, so I am very similar to everybody, mostly the ladies who are on here, and just a different generation. So I came to the U.S. When I was 2, so 1974, at the end of Vietnam. So at that time, it was we were very much mistaken as being refugees or so, but we weren't. But the advantage of living in this area is it is a very diverse community. So I did end up growing up with the Korean Association. So I grew up learning about my culture, and just like others, I struggled as well because I went to school with mostly white students, and I wanted to fit in with my white half, and I don't look like them. So I am a woman of color, and I don't. So I felt like I don't 100% fit in there. And then I went back to Korea for the first time because I fit in with my family just fine. But I went back to Korea in the 8th grade for a family visit and realized I'm not Korean enough either there. And so I struggled in my high school years of, where do I fit in? Am I just the other box? And when I grew up, there was no multiple choices. It was check one box only, and many times there wasn't an other box. It was just white, Asian. So at a time growing up in high school, I always picked white on a lot of things. But as I got older and grew up, and I learned that I love my culture. I love being multiracial. I have wonderful family on both sides. I've learned cultures on both sides, and I was blessed with a large Korean family here in the States, so I grew up learning about my Korean culture and learned to appreciate it as I gotten older. And now I'm working immersely in my professional field, sharing my culture and teaching and educating others with it. And it's something that I absolutely love doing and sharing with everybody else. So that's my history. And I'm you would maybe a native. I wouldn't say native Daytonian. I've lived here 48 years, so for a long time, and I'm married to a native Daytonian. My son is a native Daytonian, so this is home. So this has become our home now. So,
Well, thanks, Mia, and everyone for choosing your time to be here. I know it's finals week and y'all have other things going on. I think, Mia, you touch on something really important, which is context, what environment we're in. Sometimes might shift, the studies say might shift our multiracial identity, what we feel is more salient, depending on what context we're in. Am I Asian enough? Am I too Asian? So maybe that can bridge into our first question. Right now, what aspect of your racial or ethnic identity is most important to you? We don't have to go in order and take turns. We can popcorn around. This could be fluid. It's kind of just us. Tionna, you look like you want to talk, or Tia.
Okay, so for me, it's a little different. I think like when a lot of people think of mixed, they think of someone mixed with white, some like POC mixed with white, but like I'm what I say double POC, and so I can't just switch off the other side, and it's really debatable to people. I never honestly have gotten to pick what I was. Depending on who I was with, I was either black or Asian, and it just kind of went like that. So both identities are equally important to me. So I don't know. It's not something that I would want to turn off, even though people think I should, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Yes, very interesting perspective. We could all 6 be somewhere different on this spectrum.
So Max, we're going to introduce
Yeah.
Ryan, who is one of our panelists who just popped on. So Ryan, if you want to introduce yourself, we shared our name, pronouns, field of study. You can define your intersection of ethnic identity to introduce you to everybody, and then we can get continued on with that first question. Do we have Ryan? So are you able to hear us, Ryan?
Let's let Ryan get in where he fits in. What do you say?
Right. We'll do that. We'll move on to continue on with that first question. So
Does anybody feel like their racial or ethnic identity has shifted over time? I'm gonna be a real psychologist and shut up and let somebody talk.
I was gonna say yes. I definitely feel like, I mean, just on and you're in different environments. Like I've moved around a lot, so like, and you're in different environments, it does change you. And I think just in general, different stages of your life, like graduating and all that stuff, and who you associate with, or like who becomes your family as well. That can change it as well.
All right, well, I'm gonna hop on. So I'm half white. That's something that I'll lead into that with a different question. But I grew up very much with the white half of my family, so I never really got to know the Pacific Islander, Native Alaskan side of my family up until I was a teenager, and then I got interested. Like, this is what I am. I want to find things out and read more, learn language, things like that. And I feel definitely as I've aged, I've become more in tune with the person of color half of my identity, so to speak. And I think actually I lost my train home. I'll pop back in a minute when I have it.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I see nodding. Yeah, so sorry about that. At first I thought it was because my headset was muted, but then I unmuted it and you still couldn't hear me, so I'm not sure what that was. But yeah, my name's Ryan Ricardo Diaz. He, him pronouns. I'm mixed Chicano and Chinese, or Singapore Chinese, so I can't remember if there was anything else that was asked.
I think that's good.
Okay, yeah. And I thought that was a really good question. I definitely would say my racial identity has developed over time. Obviously, younger, not quite knowing where I fit in, but I look a lot more Asian than I do Latino. So I've definitely learned to sort of embrace that aspect of my racial identity more so lately than I did in the past.
So I guess I'm gonna pop in now. It took me a minute to think about what I was gonna say because I was just trying to sort out what I wanted to get across. So with my identity, I kind of grew up with both my white side and and also my Filipino side. My parents made it important, especially my dad. Surprisingly, he made it important that I know my mom's side of the family and understand my culture when I was younger. But that was a little confusing for me as a child because I didn't know like what was going on half the time. But um, I would have to agree that like I feel like an environment also has to play into your identity a little bit. Um, so for me, when I'm around my family, I don't feel out of place at all because I grew up in an environment where all my cousins are multiracial. I'm multiracial. At least everyone in my family is mostly mixed. Now, the issue I struggled with was being able to be in a social circle because one day, people were like, oh, well, you're too white for us, or one day it was, oh, well, you're too Asian for us. And oftentimes, because of the way I look, I don't look Asian sometimes, and I don't look white sometimes to them. So I get mistaken a lot, and it caused a lot of confusion growing up. So that's basically my take on it.
I'm gonna jump right on what Isabelle said actually about the whole thing of you get mistaken around different circles because that was something that happened to me all the time growing up. So I just identified as a human growing up, like just to put it simply, because around the black kids, I was the Asian kid, and around the Asian kids, I was the black kid. So it just never worked out for me anywhere. So I just was like ended up with the weird white kids that liked anime, if you know what I mean. And that was where I ended up, and they didn't even fully like me either. So like I was always an outsider until maybe I got to going to college and stuff where people were actually open-minded enough to be okay with embracing the idea that multiracial people, actually exist and they can identify as both things or however many things that they are. And I feel like that itself is probably the struggle point for a lot of people is they can't wrap their heads around that simple thing. So, yeah.
Follow up, when's the first time you felt like understood and visible and seen and heard and like accepted for the complicated piece we're talking about?
If y'all don't mind, I'm gonna hop on this one. So there was an event that I was involved in when I was at Sinclair before I transferred to Wright State, and it was called Sinclair Stronger Together. The first year I was just kind of like participating, and the second year I ended up being one of the main leaders of the movement. It was an event for diversity and inclusion, for people all across the spectrum of humanity, and it was really weird. But in that moment, when we were in the middle of the event having our panel discussion, I realized that people there were not just looking at me as just the black girl or just the Asian girl. People were actually like asking me questions around my multiracial identity during that panel discussion. And that was the first time that that had actually happened to me. And that was the first time I really realized I think I'm comfortable being both.
Anybody else?
I was just thinking that I didn't feel uncomfortable until a certain age. Like, you don't know that you're different or something's like not the societal norm until you gain more knowledge. Like, I was in China, so there was a lot of Asian people, obviously, and like, I mean, most of my friends were American because we went to international church and stuff, and a lot of the foster kids were in wheelchairs, so I wasn't out of place there. And then when I moved back to the States and I started seventh grade, is when I started feeling out of place. Like, oh, you have a disability, so that's a barrier. You can't come to my house because I have dogs. And then I guess like now that I've gotten older, I never really shared my culture or like knowledge of culture because in a way I kind of tried to be more white. I mean, my parents were white. We lived in a small town in Northwest Ohio, and so like it's that idea of like wanting to like keep that side to yourself at times. But I really felt accepted, especially again like in the States when I came to Wright State. um when I became a part of ACE, Advocates for Cultural Diversity and Excellence. We're trying to cross as a sorority, and then I started my own club called Abilities, and I built a community there as well. So just that community and togetherness has really made me feel accepted on this campus.
What's Abilities about, Rebekah?
So Abilities is just started like last year officially. Just for anyone who has a disability, physical or invisible, and then any allies can join as well. We're hoping to have more allies next year, especially those who possibly want to go in the medical field or be working with the population more. Or if anyone really, but that's kind of where our thoughts are in the future.
So, Rebekah, you've been pretty open about your disability. I hope it's okay that I ask, does that mask your racial identity variable? Or do you ever feel like that there's parts of you that aren't seen because of that? I'm sorry if my question is uneloquent.
No, I definitely, that's a beautiful question, actually. I mean, I think that my disability is more visible than my Asianness. If that's a weird thing, that's a weird concept to think about. But I've never had any like. I mean, the biggest thing that I've gotten is where are you from? You know, like I think a lot of people get that are Asian. And so, I mean, I've still gotten that like in the past 2 years, you know what I mean? But it's mostly my disability where I get those looks or that like they don't know how to act around me. And I'm like, I'm the type of person like, if you have questions, just ask, just don't stare at me. Like I don't want to be an alien in your presence. So yeah.
Did anybody else want to share about the last question? It was, I just had it and then I lost it again. It was when you felt accepted, what space you have felt okay being all aspects of that identity.
Sure, I can share a little bit. I think from my perspective, at least with my experience, I feel like it was a constant on again, off again kind of thing. So in certain atmospheres with people who grew up similar to me, I felt kind of accepted because we had something to bond over. For example, I went to school with other kids whose parents were in the military, so we could bond over the fact that, like, hey, did your dad get deployed or did your mom get deployed? Man, you know, I feel bad. Like, dang, that's sad. Do you want to come over for dinner and stuff like that? So it like opened gateways to conversations. And surprisingly, most of the kids who I did grow up with in that military aspect were mainly multiracial kids. So we had always something to relate to and always something kind of like to bond over. And so that's when I felt the most accepted when I was younger. I then moved from overseas to here, and the atmosphere took like a 180. I did not feel wanted. I didn't feel like I was heard. I didn't feel like I was even being respected sometimes, just as a normal human being. But once I graduated high school and I got to college, that kind of changed. I would have to agree with Rebekah that it took a little bit for me to get comfortable because I was still in an unfamiliar atmosphere. I had only lived in Ohio for about like 2 years right before going into college. So it was like, this is still new and this is still not something I'm used to. So I had to ease into it. But I think I got more comfortable when I started getting involved with ASA more and I got to meet more people of different identities. And I got to be a part of Advocates for Cultural Diversity and Excellence because there was a group of girls who felt the same way and we got to bond over that.
Ryan, don't feel obligated, but wanna.
To be perfectly honest, I don't think I've ever really considered that question. So that's a hard one for me to think about. I wonder if perhaps the answer is that I maybe haven't necessarily felt fully comfortable with both aspects of my racial identity. Because I mean I think it's only recently that I felt comfortable with like my Asian identity, because it is a I don't want to say niche one, but since I am technically ethnically Chinese, but I'm also a member of the Chinese diaspora. I don't have the same experiences as like mainland Chinese people, Hong Kong Chinese people. So it's I guess it's an evolving thing still.
Can you educate us some more about that, the Chinese diaspora, just what you're saying?
So my family's from Singapore, so they're southern. Back when they came from China itself, it was, I mean, must have been like the 16, 17, 1800s, so a long, long time ago. So culturally, they're very distinct from Chinese people, including the surrounding area. And that's something I didn't realize till I actually met somebody who was also from that area. My food is not technically Chinese food; it's more closely related to Malay or Indian food or things like that. And so I guess it confused me as a kid when I would talk about Chinese people don't tend to eat curry, but Singapore Chinese people do eat curry. We have Kway Teow, and we have things like that. And so it would confuse me when I talk about these things, and somebody from Hong Kong or somebody whose family is from Hong Kong or mainland China would have no idea what I was talking about. But it was quite a comfortable experience when I did finally meet somebody who was Malay, because it felt a lot more like being at home than I think I had experienced previously, outside of actual family.
I'll pop
So,
in
go
myself.
ahead, please.
I think I'm with Ryan. I don't think I was comfortable in either area. When my social circle is mainly white, my fellow white folks, because that's where I grew up. It was a mainly white community, and while I was friendly with them, because I'm always the nice person. Mia's the nice person. Mia's the helpful one. Mia is, so I was like everybody's friend. So I wasn't in any popular group or any group like that. I just took in everybody. It's like and was friendly to everybody. So I I just I knew there was a difference. I mean, I was even told growing up by a parent of one of my friends, good friends, who I always hung around at their house was, "Oh, you act white." I'm like, "What is that? What's that supposed to mean?" So it's just really so I got little comments like that growing up with the white community, and then when I get on with my Korean community, it was difficult too because I'm one of those Asian Americans who do not speak, are not fluent in the language of my ethnicity. So I do not speak Korean. I wasn't fluent in Korean. And that was, things change now. And that's a generational thing. Because now they realize that, children can have several languages and be successful. But when I was 4 years old and didn't speak English, I didn't speak English coming to America. I spoke Korean with my mom, and my dad is fluent in Korean. So I had to start school, and I was having such trouble and hard time, difficulty learning the different languages because there's some letters in the Korean alphabet that doesn't exist in the English language. So I was having like R's and L's and having trouble, and Z's, having trouble pronouncing words. So the speech therapist at the time basically instructed my parents to not to speak to me in Korean, speak to me in English, and so I can get acclimated because this is where we were living. And my mom learned English with me, and we ended up, and my sister was born here. So we just they didn't really speak Korean to us after a while, and we just ended up forgetting some of the languages we know. I know some words, I know some things, but I am not a fluent Korean speaker. So when I am with my Korean relatives or at the Korean churches or at the Korean stores, I feel an outsider because I don't speak the language that they're part of. So like I am a member of the Dayton Korean Association, but when I go to Korean meetings, I'm association meetings, I'm completely feel left out. I can understand some of the things they're talking about, but I don't. So that for me is because I don't speak that Korean language. I don't really feel like I fit in comfortably, am comfortable in that circle. And then because I don't look white, I don't feel like I'm 100% comfortable in that circle. And the area where I realized more of anything, of where I am more comfortable is actually when I came to start working at Wright State with the at that time AAPI Center, because I was around others who shared my culture, even though we weren't all Korean, but we had very similar backgrounds, even though we were different in ages. And so that's my stories, because I am one who's not fluent in my language. So that's just a little bit tidbit of myself.
Let's go on a little bit, unless Ben, you're dying to get in here.
I mean, I genuinely feel as if a lot of my early childhood was, well, not even early childhood, just early childhood, just mostly up until I came to college. I felt like I was always an imposter in terms of, ethnic or racial identity, because, I went to Clinton Massey from kindergarten to like 10th grade. Then I moved to Wilmington High School. But in Clinton, Massey, I can count on one hand how many people of color there were. And there were two, and I was one of them. So, I had a lot of people guessing my ethnicity for fun, which was a whole can of worms. But I don't know. I've just always been referred to. That's Benjamin. He's the brown one for most of my life. So I feel like I've always had this big disconnect to my culture, my heritage, and where I grew up. It wasn't until I moved to Wilmington where I started to kind of look into my heritage more seriously and kind of be more upfront and firm with people when it came to my own ethnicity. I think I started to feel more comfortable in my own skin around when I moved to Wilmington and I made, friends with other kids of color. And I think when I came to Wright State, it was officially like cemented because I definitely feel like I've become my own person enough to not feel like an imposter in my own skin, if that makes any sense.
Ben, did you feel accepted by those other kids of color as a kid of color or as an Asian? Do you feel like they saw your Asianness and your Asian side, or you just felt like finally I'm with other brown people?
I mean, it was a little mix of both. I think the community of color that I was in high school was very close knit because there were 10, 15 of us, and I felt seen for being Native and being Asian at the same time, or Pacific Islander at the same time.
Oh, it's nice. All right, let's unpack this term white passing. Who's heard it and who feels like they can speak to it from their own personal experience? There's no takers. I'll do it, but I want to hear from the students.
Now this kind of hits a little bit harder with the white passing phrase. Definitely, I've heard it a lot. Um, as and it's a little bit uncomfortable to talk about a little bit, but I'm okay with talking about it now. Again, I'm half white, I'm half Filipino. I've never been really insecure around my family or anything like that, but I will say that in the Philippines, they do have terminology for people who are mixed that is low-key kind of offensive if you really think about it. And, in the Philippines, there's ranges of color in the Philippines. There are people who are paler than me, there are people who are ethnically darker than me. When you look at my family and everything, we come in like all different shades, basically. So it's normal. To me, it's normal. But because I'm half white, I tend to obviously look white. I'm 50%. That it makes sense. Adds up. But I noticed that other Filipinos or like other people I wouldn't really know that well, because I don't know Tagalog that well, unfortunately. My mom tried to teach me, but it just did not work. I couldn't learn it. It was really hard as a child. But I noticed that they called me a mestiza, which basically is like a derogatory term or a person with whiteness in them, in a sense. And when they say it, they don't mean to come off as offensive, but it kind of is offensive given the topic. So oftentimes there's some moments where I'm with certain friends or certain people that I've, not hanged out anymore. Oftentimes I would kind of be, I guess, denied about the other half of my identity. When people would call me a mestiza or any kind of like terminology that felt kind of derogatory, it made me really uncomfortable, and it made me feel like, oh, you're not acknowledging all of me, you're only acknowledging half of me in that sense. And I can agree that, I do come off as white passing. I don't look fully Asian. I don't look fully Filipino. And it's, I guess it's kind of an awkward thing to talk about in a sense because it's still kind of something I'm working on. So,
Thanks for your vulnerability and willingness to share. Anyone, do we think that a white passing multiracial Asian has more privilege than a non? Like, does privilege work that way? Is it dissected and compounded in that way?
So actually, I was going to contribute to the question before, kind of ish, but I guess we can kind of take this and mix it in as we will. But I'm sure a lot of us mixed people have noticed this. People tend to take the term white passing and use it on every single mixed person. I've been called white passing, which really doesn't make sense, but you think about it, there are white celebrities who basically buy features to look like us. So anyone could literally be anything nowadays in the worst way possible. So like I feel like people with the internet, like, with TikTok and Twitter now, people take terms and just run. They just sprint. So like the term white passing has been used on me personally, which obviously I'm not mixed with white. So it literally makes no sense. But like I just find it interesting how certain terms have changed meaning to some people and they think that they're helping society be better that way.
Thank you. Rebekah, I saw a reaction out of you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they are more privileged at all. I just think that it's kind of like having an invisible disability. Like they not believe you or that you have a disability, and then you just have more invisible internal struggles than external struggles. You know what I mean? So, in my opinion, yes, the outside world may think you have more privilege, and it, in maybe some weird way that like invisible disability they may get the job but then not be able to get the accommodations they need. You know what I mean? I sorry, I'm referencing it because that's a lot of what I know. But that's how I think of being like the term whiteness, I guess, with Asianness. So yeah.
This is actually really fascinating because I think intersectionality has a lot to do with our different perspectives. And I don't want to talk a lot about me, but I do feel compelled to share that while I grew up knowing that my mom's from Thailand and I have Thai family and, my friends come over from ramen noodles and my Asian side is friggin' awesome, I also feel like I had an element of white privilege by being raised as if I were white. So I wasn't taught to think Asian. My white father taught me how to navigate systems. And I'm the firstborn Asian son. So, I got a lot of extra positive attention that I didn't necessarily deserve for anything other than, let's just pile it on this person. And so, like, male privilege, white privilege, I had it until I realized and I had to grapple with it. Like, what the heck am I doing? I know like, am I a person of color? I really had to go through that at an adult age. I really had to go through that. Like, do I even deserve to call myself a person of color? Am I oppressed? In what ways? And then, the more you unpack it, the more you can't avoid the pain that goes along with it, and I feel like that's a lot of what's going on now. But it's interesting to hear these other perspectives to say no and no and no, and I'm like, well, shit, what am I going through? Excuse my language, sorry. Other comments? Okay. Well, maybe then I think we all identify as people of color, so do we all feel belonging in spaces for people of color? saw one nod and I saw three of these. So I want to hear from one of these people.
Since everyone's like not saying anything and
I was about
awkwardly
to say
waiting,
something, but go right ahead. I'm gonna go after you.
no, you go first. Go ahead. I feel like
Okay.
you'd have more to say about it, like in all honesty, like in a different way. Like I
Yeah.
think we have similar things to say, but like you would in a different way. So
Different
go ahead.
perspectives, same struggle. Um, I'd have to say the reason why I went like this is sometimes when I'm with a group of people, like for example, if I'm hanging out at like the identity center, I feel comfortable with myself and who I'm with. But if I'm out of the identity center and I'm with other people of color, sometimes because I don't look the way that they think I should look, I get profiled wrong. So there were times because I work at the dormitories in the apartments. There was one time I had to do a write up for a report, and it was kind of uncomfortable because the situation escalated in a way that it shouldn't have. And I was just doing my job again. It was for the rules of housing, but I later on found out that that person thought I was, and I quote, this is what apparently they said, was I was a racist white person. And that was kind of awkward because for me, I was just kind of like, where does that come into play? I never mentioned who I was to the student. I don't know why they felt that way about me. Like, why was I suddenly being put as a label? That kind of shocked me. So there are times where, like, if I don't look the way that certain people picture other ethnicities, it makes me very uncomfortable because it's like, well, now you got me questioning, am I enough? Am I who I'm supposed to be now? Like, should I be looking a certain way? Should I be darker? Should I be lighter? Should my hair be more coarse? Should my hair be more fine? Should my hair be curly? Should it be straight? What makes a person an ethnicity, basically? And you start to question yourself, and it kind of takes your self-esteem from here to here. And when I heard that that student made that statement, I was very hurt for like a few weeks. Not gonna lie, because I had to sit there and I had to grapple with the fact that, like, again, I don't look like who they think I look like, and it's like I can't change that. I can't do anything about that because I was kind of born this way, and to be judged on the outside without knowing me kind of sucks a lot. But yeah, that was my perspective.
So it depends on who I'm with a lot. If I feel accepted in places that are for people of color or not. A lot of people, when I was growing up, would always toss up the argument of you have mixed privilege. Um, and which I know what they mean of the so-called privilege of being racially ambiguous. It's both a blessing and a curse in itself. And honestly, I feel like it's more of a curse than anything. Because like that people will say anything around you. If they can't figure out what you are, they will literally say whatever they want in front of you and think it's okay. Because I've been in some spaces with Asian people who think that I'm Asian. Like it's a really rare thing though that other Asians think I'm even Asian. But they thought I was Asian, so they were like talking crap about black people, and I'm like, "Hi, I'm also half black," and they're like, "Oh," they're like, "I was joking. I love black people. I'm joking," and I'm like, "Not with that tone of voice. No, we know you don't." And then the same thing happens on the other side of the coin with black people is like, I'm mostly a black passing person to most of society. Like I've gotten the whole shebang of getting followed by the cops on campus, getting profiled at the store, all that stuff. And so like I'm black passing to most people. And there's been a lot of times where I was with black people and they're like, "Oh, talking crap about Asians, and then it's like, you can't do that around me. And they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I love Asian people. Like, I love Chinese food. I'm like, that does not fix anything. And so, like, sometimes I just don't feel like I belong with any people of color because, like, there's always the argument of, well, you don't fit in as just one of us. And that's enough to drive me away sometimes. So, like, being included in spaces like this where there's other multiracial people, because sometimes it is hard to find each other, that means a lot, and where we can all just kind of dish out what we've gone through. So it depends.
I definitely have to echo what Tionna said a lot. It's when I was younger, I didn't care for the term "people of color" because it to me implied solidarity that I didn't experience, and that I think isn't really there now, because I'm definitely not white passing, but I guess you could call me Asian passing because people don't tend to realize I'm Latino unless they read my last name, and then even then, I don't think they tend to think much about it. But I would hear things like anti-black rhetoric from Asian people or even Latinos, and it didn't make me feel comfortable because I didn't feel comfortable with that kind of thing. And then being Asian, I would get a lot of I would get a lot of racism from all sorts of minorities. And I remember I used to live in Europe, and I used to think it was a lot of racism that I experienced there, and I would read in the news about how much worse it was in the U.S. And when I moved back here, I was expecting to have like solidarity because of the way that people talked about it online. It seemed as if I'd move here and then people of color as a whole would still treat me better, even if white people didn't. And then I got here and I pretty quickly realized that that was not the case, that it was nobody really likes anybody. Uh, so I'd say like on people of color, like groups that use the term people of color, I tend to feel more comfortable at. Like on campus, we have LANA and all that. I feel comfortable there. But I don't necessarily feel comfortable just because around people just because they are also people of color. Because I find that oftentimes there's still the same whether they're anti-black, anti-Asian, anti-Latino. There's a lot of racism still there.
I'd like to take a moment for a PSA to say all our oppression is interwoven and model minority. It's a myth. It's all created to disjoint us and to separate us. We need to stand in solidarity with all oppressed groups and identity variables. It's not just about race, not just about sexuality or ability status. It's all interwoven. What about being exoticized or fetishized? Ben, I saw a reaction. I'm interested because you come from a different community as far as that goes.
Okay, so I come from a pretty white community, and I'm very ethnically ambiguous. I'm Native and I'm Hawaiian, And in the gay community especially, fetishization is incredibly popular. It's very common, and it just makes me feel gross. Like just for being, not white, where, I have, back when I was single, I had people hitting me up saying, "Oh, I must be a total savage because I'm Native, yada yada yada." And I'm like, no, I don't know. It's definitely been a struggle for me to kind of find that fine line where a person likes me for me and they're not just fetishizing me because I'm exotic, Also, before I totally shut up, there is it's very 50-50 in my experience with the gay community, at least white folk, well, not all white, just the gay community in small towns. You are either, as a person of color, I was either fetishized or I was just instantly like unmatched or blocked or so and so because I talk about my ethnic identity and how much that means to me because it's a very large part of who I am now. But that's my experience.
devalued in some way, which is a different fetishization also does that. It's just, but yeah. Okay, I know y'all want to talk. Come on.
I guess I'll go first. Let me tell you what. Let me tell you what. The way Tionna and I reacted as soon as we heard the word fetishization come out. Sorry, I had to just get that out of my system. But I do remember Ben telling me some stories that happened with them, and I was so shocked to hear that they were going through this almost like a similar thing in a sense. Obviously very different because again it's a different community, but at the end of the day it's still shocking and it's still way uncomfortable. I've had times where I don't know if everyone has, I feel like everyone has kind of gone through this a little bit, but when someone thinks they're making a good compliment to you or like a good pickup line to you and you're in public and you feel uncomfortable to even address it, so now you just gotta be like, thanks, I guess. No, thank you, but I remember, I think I was younger and I don't know what situation it was, but there was a comment made at me, and to me it didn't feel flattering. It made me really uncomfortable, but I was a young child, and my mom was holding my hand, and she was like tightening her grip, and she's like, we can't make a scene here. We can't make a scene here. We're just gonna have to be quiet, because again, she's from a different time, a different generation, so her thoughts are way different from where I am. But there was one particular situation that I will probably never forget that made me realize that no matter what community you're from, there's always, unless you've known that person and you know what their ideals or their morals or how they think, it's always going to be a shocker if they say something. So I was at another university visiting for an event. I got introduced to tons of people from different friend groups. It was more like a social for the Asian community. I think it was like a cultural day at one university. I won't name which one for privacy reasons, but there was a guy that one of my friends knew, and I felt okay around them. I felt kind of comfortable, because this is a friend of a friend, and he was also a person of color, so I didn't feel any type of pressure. I didn't feel, any differently towards him. But he had made some advanced comments at me, I guess. Like, he tried to make advances at me with comments, and at first it didn't seem like it was harmful. But then he said something along the lines of, oh, so you're mixed, like you're half white. Yeah, your skin tone is much more prettier than full Asian girls and everything like that. Like, I love the color and stuff like he made, yeah, I know. He made a comment that put me on the spot because, one, how am I supposed to react to that? Like, in a public situation where I'm surrounded by a multitude of people, where I'm just like, did I just hear that correctly? Did I just get a compliment that, wow, your skin tone is beautiful because you're half white, because you're not full, because you're this? And that kind of hit a nerve with me, because one of the things I struggled with was my identity, and the fact that they used my skin tone as a way to compliment me made me really uncomfortable. And I definitely had to talk with my friend, and I said, hey, I don't want to be around this person anymore. If we could relocate, that would be great. And oftentimes I would get some comments from older men, usually through Facebook or some other connection. I wouldn't know them, but they would know people I know, and they would tell me they would just basically prey on me in a sense. And, at some point my race was always brought up. or at some point I stopped responding to them. I stopped paying attention. And the moment I would not pay attention to that comment or acknowledge that comment, I was then yelled at through Messenger or like any type of message that was just like, oh, you know what? Beauty's on the inside. Never mind. You're not beautiful after all. You're just a dirty insert words. And it's a little bit starking. So yeah. And another experience I would say would be if I was overseas in the Philippines. On occasion, because I was mixed, I couldn't go out alone at night. I couldn't go out to the mall by myself. I couldn't walk by myself. There's a lot of, I love the Philippines, but in certain areas, there is a lot of corruption and you could get kidnapped and sex trafficked. And I was often a target of that because I fit the description, unfortunately. And I think I was in 8th grade when that happened. I had to always hold hands with my cousins. I had to go to the bathroom with someone. I didn't have my privacy. There was no privacy because I was always being looked at. I had my hair touched without my permission. I've had my hands and my arms touched without my permission. And that was the first time I felt like really uncomfortable that I was being put on this like I don't even want to call it a pedestal, but on this like I feel like I was being mounted on a wall to look at, and I didn't like it.
You were sexualized.
Mm-hmm. Without understanding it, and it was like, yeah. So that was my experience on both sides of the, at least from my communities, from my white community and from my Filipino community. At least that's my experience on both sides. There's more extreme stories, but not appropriate. So
I think everybody wants to talk on this. Let's go to Tionna and then Ryan. And then Rebekah, maybe you, if you have some stuff to share too.
So it's been a lifelong struggle. I always hated the word exotic for as long as I can possibly remember because it was always used to describe me. But the thing is, even as a kid, I was very aware that exotic should be used to describe inanimate objects. I don't know, maybe that's just me, but like, if it's a living object, it's like an animal or something, something that you're gonna look at. And so I was always super, super aware of being fetishized by people because for as long as I could remember, men would touch me without my permission. Even as a very small child, even if it was something as small as like touching my face or touching my hair, because I have a wig on right now, but I have like actually like really, really curly hair. And so like people loved doing whatever they could to like get in my personal bubble, and it was awful. But like there were more extreme incidents as I got older. I won't get into all of them because they're not all family friendly, and I know this is being recorded. But I've had experiences like on dating apps, for example. People would just like slide in the DMs because they're like, it's this ambiguous brown skin girl. I wonder what she can do for me, And I'm just like, no, I'm not here for that. I'm not here for that. I'm not here to make your dreams come true, so to speak, And it's really disturbing how much people are so open about fetishizing mixed people. Like they think they're giving us a compliment and they think that they're adding to our mixed privilege, but they're really not. Honestly, like it made me hate it even more, honestly, the whole mixed thing. Because like the thing is, it wasn't just like white people fetishizing me, it was like everyone fetishizing me. Like I didn't feel safe around any people. I'm bi, so it just gets a whole lot more awkward there too, because there's some, I don't know, I think everyone has noticed this, but in every like gay girl Netflix show, it's always like this ambiguous brown skinned girl with this, I hate to say it, but like really pale white androgynous girl, and like there were so many of I hate to say it like that, but there were so many of people that just wanted to make that their reality in that just in itself. And it's just like so weird because like we know what it's like as queer people to like be fetishized for our queerness. So like you would think people would have the brains to like actually think through fetishizing someone for another aspect of themselves, but they don't always. And so like it's always been kind of like a mess with that. Like I'm with a great guy now, and he's also very racially ambiguous because he's Puerto Rican. But like we talk about this all the time because fetishization is not something that we should see as a compliment, even though a lot of other people may look at us being fetishized as a compliment. It's not, and it never will be. It's putting us as an object to just whatever, and we're still people, no matter how ambiguous or exotic they think that they should tell us that we look, it's that's not that's not how it should be.
Can you expand for us what it means to be fetishized for your queerness?
Yeah, so maybe it's because I'm half Japanese and the culture there is different. So my mom is from Japan, and in Japan I have been very aware of people are very conservative there still. A lot of men are very conservative there. They hold, in general, Asians tend to be a lot more conservative in certain aspects of life. But there's this weird thing that I think also does happen in other places, but although they're extremely anti-gay there, um, the men there love watching and seeing lesbian women, seeing queer couples, and they think like that's hot, but only when it's for, but they don't want us to like also exist. So like it makes no sense. But like that's what I've seen a lot is like people think like the idea is hot until they actually have to deal with the people as people. And like that kind of goes for the racial fetishization too, is like they're cool, they think we're hot until they actually have to realize that, hey, we're a full package of human with our trauma and racial hurts and stuff that we have to deal with on a regular. They don't want the full package, and that's just a simple fact sometimes. Is that's why like dating as like a queer person of color is like super hard, is because like people don't really stop and think all that through, and it can get a little rough sometimes.
Brian, the chat box says you have a lot to say.
Yeah, I guess none of my experiences are particularly as bad as what Tionna or Isabelle have experienced. It sounds like they've experienced, but I think part of that is them being women. Obviously, there's a lot more. Well, I mean, sexism is a thing, whereas I don't have to deal with that. But yeah, I definitely it's something that definitely has showed up more recently than it has in the past. I think in the past, generally speaking, it, for the most part, Asian men aren't considered particularly desirable, which is it happens. But lately, I've noticed, like I use dating apps too every once in a while, and the vast majority of the people that I match with, if they're not Asian, they inevitably end up showing a very obvious fetish for me. And it's either they want me to be like an anime boy or a K-pop guy. And I mean, it's very clear. And it's one of the things that sort of turns me off of K-pop and anime is this, the people that are fans of it, yeah, are just, they want me to be something I'm not. And it's very uncomfortable to be dehumanized, I guess, in that way. Like I want to just be, I'm just me. I don't want to be, I don't want people to be interested in me because I'm Asian, and they want me to fit a mold that they have created of their fantasy of what they want me to be. And I definitely like, yeah, like I'm exotic to them, and exotic is for fruits in my mind. It's not for people. Uh, and it's definitely very uncomfortable to realize that. And it's to some degree disheartening too to think, okay, well maybe this is somebody that I'm going to get along with, and then no, once I realize that they're talking too much about K-pop or they're talking too much about anime, and intentions sort of show up really quickly, and it's something that I find because a lot of my friends are not. They don't have this experience, and it's hard to talk about this kind of thing because they hear it and they think, okay, well that seems like that works for you, that's a benefit if anything. And I'm like, if I want to throw up around this person, it's not a positive. But yeah, like that's basically it, I'd say.
Rebekah, do you have anything? on this one?
I don't have any like specific experiences, but I do have like in the back of my mind of like someone would only want to date me because I'm Asian, like I guess so like that's kind of like in the back of my or even my sisters because I have a lot of sisters and stuff, but like that's a worry for me. But luckily, I haven't had any experience with that personally, but it's a worry.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I wanted to make sure that we included you on this question. Okay, well, we're very low on time. So I understand we need to move towards wrapping up and see if we have any audience questions. So if there's any questions, let's take them from our small audience. And then maybe we can save a little time for one small takeaway. We can go around the circle and say, we want other people to know about our lived experience, whether they're here to do it or not. Maybe record it.
I have a question. A lot of you have shared your experiences, on the college level or interacting socially. I was wondering, in terms of your home life, your family life, did you find it difficult to communicate, maybe with siblings or particularly maybe parents or grandparents who, maybe just have sort of one racial line, whereas you're dealing with maybe two different identities, and how do you facilitate those lines of communication and kind of working through some of those struggles with family members?
So I can kind of put a little answer to that. Ultimately, the answer would probably be like, I feel like it's a very long and slow process. Talking to certain family members about your identity. Um, Mainly because, again, because they've only had their certain experiences to go off of, and it's vastly different from my experiences. Sometimes it can be hard to relate. That also has to go with generation views as well. For example, communication with my grandma will be very different with communication with my mother. Um, so with my mom, I'm a little more open about what I go through and like what's been bothering me because at some point or another she's gone through that similar experience but never talks about it. With my grandma, she I feel like she has a different view on things, honestly, if I had to be more specific. But in terms of communication, I feel like slowly being more open with them has helped a lot. Um, I don't know how it is for everyone else, but for me growing up, I've always had issues with talking about things that I go through. At least growing up, it's not until recently that I started opening up more about that um to people within my life and people outside of my life. I tend to be a very private person, but yeah, I think small conversations here and there tend to go a long way.
I would say that again, it's a difficult process. I think for myself, conversations between even my parents sometimes, like they're still married to this day after almost 25 years, but like some of the recent conversations we've had, like over different things like Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate, like as much as they love each other, there are some points that they just still don't get about each other. And then there's me having to sit in the middle as both of them, so to speak, and have to like talk both sides through it. It's like it's a mess, quite frankly, sometimes. And and then there's the whole thing of like with, more extended family members, some cousins, Like on like my dad's side, they'll be like, no, you're half Asian, so you have privilege. And I'm like, where? Um, and then, on, the Asian side, they don't mean harm, but like they always are like, well, you don't really look Japanese, so like, I don't think you would go through anything for being half Japanese, but the thing is sometimes it does come up and it can get very weird. So it's really just like, I think, people not to be like weird on the like family planning. That's not what I'm talking about, is not family planning, but like people do need to like realize, especially nowadays, I think in our generation, there's a lot of people floating around online who are like, oh my gosh, I want Malaysian babies. And that's one of the main reasons I hate the internet. Or like, they'll be like, I want Asian babies. I'm just like, no. They need to think about the life that they want to bring into the world, because it's not just like this little accessory, you're gonna have to have some really hard conversations with that kid. And I'm sure a lot of you guys know this, and probably are aware of this, but like it's really hard, especially like I'm blessed to not be in that situation, but there are some of my friends who, had to grow up with their parents in separate households, and that made their racial identity whole thing a whole nother struggle. Like, people need to realize that, if they're gonna bring someone into the world because they think they want a mixed child, they're gonna need to do a lot of thinking and a lot of work to make sure that that kid grows up okay and okay with themselves, because it does take a toll on your mental health. It really does, and it affects every part of your being.
I
Linda,
think I've had an
please.
Yeah, I think I've had an interesting experience with that. In particular, my I do look a lot more Asian. I've said that, but I don't tend to get treated like I'm Latino or Chicano, either one, I guess. But my dad sort of has difficulty understanding that. He's prepared, or he's tried to prepare me in ways that, or he's tried to prepare me for things that I don't think I'll ever experience. Because he is Latino. He's grown up sort of being treated like he's, I don't necessarily want to say a threat, but there are parallels between how Latinos are treated and how Black individuals are treated in this country, and he is very keenly aware of those parallels. So when he prepares me, like, or when he's worried about me, he's worried about me being treated that way. And I do get treated poorly because of my race, but it's not in a way, people aren't scared of me. Nobody thinks that I'm going to steal from them. Nobody thinks that I'm going to do anything like that. And that's something that he prepares me for, that kind of thing, when that's not what I have to worry about, really. So it is interesting, I guess, that having that dynamic. He knows that I get treated poorly, but it's the way that he expects it is different from the way I really do. And my mom, coming from a majority Chinese country, she's also aware that something happens because she experiences it to some degree here too. People treat her weirdly because of her accent, even though English is her first language. It's a different dialect of English, so people don't tend to understand what she's talking about or her accent at all. So she doesn't. Neither of my parents really know how to prepare me for what I have experienced, and that's something that I think you can really only understand if you grew up with it. And it's hard to sort of see your spouse or see your kids and really know what it's like.
So, about 5 minutes left. Give y'all 1 minute each for what you want others to understand about your lived experience. So, make it succinct.
I'll go ahead and start using the time. So I think what my hope is that people will want to actually listen, because I think that's one of the first things that comes with understanding our experience, is that hey, we do exist and we also need to be understood. Like our experience may not be like everyone else's, and that's okay. We're all individuals at the end of the day. But as the world continues to change and evolve, and as interracial relationships become more and more mainstream, I think people will need to actually like have some conversations, whether if that's about interracial marriages, relationships, or multiracial kids. All those cultures crossing. It's gonna create you know this beautiful diversity dynamic, but it's also going to take some work to make that work. And so I just hope that people will actually take the time to start thinking about having those conversations.
Thank you, Tia. Next person. Ben, you look ready.
Darn my ready face. I feel genuinely that we kind of, as a whole and as a country, we need to stop and think and realize that oppression doesn't start and stop with one group of people. We need to have a continuous conversation and actually listen to each other and offer some kind of solution of sustenance rather than just, performative activism. And, only caring about certain things when they come up in the news or when it suddenly becomes a national tragedy, even though it's been a thing for months or years or decades or centuries. I think we really need to take a moment, reflect, and to look forward.
That was beautiful, Ben. Your face told the truth. You were ready. Who's next?
For me, I was just going to say that I strongly believe that Asians or any other minority group is not better or worse than other minority groups, and I hope that we can stay in solidarity all together, because I think if we can unite, then more change can happen for every minority group.
No.
I think. Oh, Isabelle. Sorry.
Oh, my bad, Ryan. I can't see you. Go ahead, please.
Sorry. I was going to say, I think it's important because there's sort of this push that to emphasize our similarities. And yeah, we're all people. We all have a lot of similarities, but we're also very diverse. And it's a beautiful thing how diverse humanity is. But it does mean that there are a lot of differences, cultural differences, points of reference, how we're treated. And it's important to recognize just the vast my perspective is different from Ben's perspective, is different from Isabelle's perspective, is different from everybody's. And a large part of that is because of our cultural upbringing. And that doesn't mean you want to super emphasize that still, but it's important to be aware of it, I think. Because it affects how we act and how we treat others to some degree.
Y'all are making perfect timing, Isabelle.
I was about to say, everyone's kind of taken a piece of what I wanted to say, but overall, I just think that we're all human. We have our differences, we have different cultural upbringings, and that should be beautiful. We should strive for a society that understands each other, that can empathize with each other, but at the same time address situations that are important to each other without malice and without hate. I also hope that people keep in mind that just because certain things don't happen to you doesn't mean it doesn't happen to anyone else near you. I've met a lot of people who have said that, oh, I don't know what you're going through. Like, I don't experience that. That's okay if you don't experience it. But when it's time to have a conversation, let's listen to each other and let's have that conversation, because clearly it's needed. Yeah.
To everyone, thank you for the privilege of letting me hear your story. Mia, please say what you have to say and bring us home, because this is...
Thank you, everybody, for a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful conversation. And thank you to our student panelists. I think this is what we need to hear. We can have lectures, we can have films, we can have speakers, but this is personal. This is experiences. This is our students that we share our everyday lives with. So I think that sharing your stories and your experience and your vulnerability is so important, is so able not only for others to learn, but about us to learn about ourselves too. And it's an opportunity for us to share. Like I said, this is a rare opportunity. We get to be in a room full of, hopefully virtually in a room full of people who are like us. So, so yes, and thank you for everybody that's attending, and thank you, big hand everybody, all their students, to Max for wonderful facilitation and leading the discussion tonight. Thank you so much. And this is only, we still have several Asian Heritage Month activities coming up. So check our website and LANA's website for the calendar. And join us we have a dialogue coming up next week on Wednesday about Hear Our Voices, empowering the Asian women voice. So we have our Asian women panelist on that, and we have a wonderful opportunity to have film screening in Minari. I have 2 tickets left. So there's 2 spaces to go on Eventbrite and sign up for those. We still have 2 tickets. And then we follow with virtual Asian Culture Night. We get to share the culture from community groups. And then we will end our month with a special film viewing of Vincent Hu, the story about Vincent Chin, the killing of Vincent Chin, and what's going on with the increased anti-Asian sentiments that are going on. So we will have that at the end of the evening. And yes, Tionna and Rebekah, congratulations, both of you, on your upcoming graduation. That's a big achievement, and we're so proud of you. And thank you again. We are now 7:31, so we're 1 minute late. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Candace, for joining us. And Emily had to go, and our other caller had to leave as well. So thank you for a wonderful evening tonight. And I'm pretty sure that our folks at enrollment and admissions will also enjoy our film, our conversation as well, to help recruit some future LANA students. So everybody have a good night.
Bleep out my mistake.
So thank you, everybody. Enjoy your evening.